I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would destroy her own marriage for a few moments of excitement. But here I am, 32 years old, standing in the wreckage of everything I once called mine. And the worst part is that I brought it all on myself. My name is Lysandra, and this is the story of how my husband Saul turned my own betrayal into the most perfectly orchestrated revenge I've ever witnessed. It started like most affairs do, with boredom and justification. Saul and I had been married for 8 years, and somewhere along the way, the spark had dimmed to barely glowing embers. He worked long hours at his accounting firm, coming home exhausted and distracted. I worked as a dental hygienist at a small clinic in our Ohio suburb, spending my days cleaning teeth and making small talk with patients who barely remembered my name. Our 6-year-old son Tyler was the bright spot in our lives, but even he couldn't fill the growing void I felt inside. I found myself staring in the mirror each morning, wondering when I had become so invisible. When had Saul stopped really looking at me? When had our conversations become limited to grocery lists and school pickup schedules? I told myself I deserved better. After all, I was the one who kept our household running smoothly. I chose our house, planned our vacations, even picked out Saul's clothes most mornings. I was organized, efficient, attractive, so why did I feel like I was disappearing? That's when Marcus arrived at the physical therapy clinic in our building. He was 29, athletic in that natural way that comes from actually playing sports, rather than just going to the gym. He had this easy smile and a way of making everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. When he started working there in March, I noticed how he always seemed to time his lunch breaks with mine. At first, it was innocent enough. We'd chat in the parking lot about weekend plans or complain about difficult patients. He listened when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed at home, nodding sympathetically when I explained how Saul never seemed to have time for real conversations anymore. "You seem like the kind of woman who deserves to be appreciated," Marcus said one afternoon as we sat in my car during a sudden rainstorm. "Your husband's lucky to have someone who cares so much about making everything perfect." Those words hit something deep inside me that had been starving for attention. When was the last time Saul had said anything like that? When had he last noticed the effort I put into our life together? I started dressing up for work again, choosing outfits that made me feel confident and attractive. I began looking forward to those parking lot conversations with Marcus, feeling more alive during those 20-minute breaks than I had in months at home. The text messages started in April. Marcus would send funny memes during the day or ask how my morning was going. Simple things that Saul never bothered with anymore. I found myself checking my phone constantly, smiling at messages that made me feel seen and wanted. "Your smile could light up this whole dreary building," Marcus texted one Tuesday afternoon. "I hope someone tells you that every day." But someone didn't tell me that every day. Saul barely looked up from his laptop when I got home, too busy with spreadsheets and client calls to notice that I'd started wearing makeup again or that I'd bought new perfume. I began to reframe our marriage in my mind. Saul's long work hours became neglect. His tiredness became indifference. His practical approach to household management became taking me for granted. Every small irritation grew larger in my imagination, feeding the narrative that I was a victim of his inattention. When Marcus suggested we grab coffee after work one evening, I said yes without hesitation. When that coffee turned into dinner at a restaurant 2 towns over, I told myself I deserved this small pleasure. When he walked me to my car afterward and kissed me in the parking lot, I kissed him back with 8 years of accumulated resentment fueling my passion. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he whispered against my lips. "You're incredible, Lysandra. I can't stop thinking about you." Driving home that night, I felt more alive than I had in years. My heart was racing, my skin tingling with the memory of his touch. This was what I'd been missing. The excitement, the desire, the feeling of being wanted rather than just needed. I walked into our house and found Saul asleep on the couch, his laptop still open beside him. Tyler was already in bed. The dishes from dinner were still in the sink, and Saul's work papers were scattered across the dining room table. Looking at this scene, I felt justified in my choices. This was my life, cleaning up after everyone else while being completely ignored. If Saul had paid attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere for affection. If he had made an effort to romance me occasionally, I wouldn't have been so susceptible to Marcus's charm. Really, when I thought about it, this was as much Saul's fault as it was mine. That logic carried me through the next several weeks as my relationship with Marcus intensified. We started meeting for lunch at hotels, stealing hours together whenever our schedules aligned. I bought new lingerie, spent money on spa treatments, and began living a double life that felt infinitely more exciting than my real one. I became an expert at covering my tracks. New sheets went into the wash immediately. I deleted text messages and cleared browser histories. I created elaborate stories about working late or meeting girlfriends for dinner. The deception came surprisingly easily, and I felt clever and sophisticated managing these complex lies. Saul never questioned my explanations. He seemed genuinely oblivious to the changes in my behavior, which only reinforced my belief that he had checked out of our marriage emotionally. When I came home glowing from an afternoon with Marcus, Saul would barely look up from his dinner. When I wore a new dress or styled my hair differently, he didn't notice. "You look nice," he might say absently if I directly asked for his opinion, but his attention would already be drifting back to his phone or the television. Meanwhile, Marcus made me feel like the center of the universe. He complimented everything from my perfume to the way I laughed. He sent flowers to my office with notes that made my coworkers sigh with envy. He planned romantic surprises and remembered details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier. "You deserve so much more than what you're getting at home," he told me one afternoon as we lay tangled in hotel sheets. "A woman like you should be worshipped, not ignored." I agreed completely. I did deserve more. I deserved passion and attention and romance. I deserved to feel beautiful and desired. If Saul couldn't provide those things, then I had every right to find them elsewhere. By summer, I was taking bigger risks. I started inviting Marcus to our house on evenings when Saul texted that he'd be working late. We'd make love in my marital bed, and I'd feel a thrill of power knowing that I was finally taking control of my own happiness. I was so careful about cleaning up afterward, washing sheets and spraying air freshener, that I felt completely confident in my ability to keep this secret indefinitely. Saul trusted me completely, and I used that trust to my advantage without a moment's guilt. One evening in July, I was rushing to erase evidence of Marcus's visit when I noticed Saul's favorite coffee mug in the kitchen sink. It was still warm to the touch, which was odd since he'd texted me just an hour earlier saying he'd be late at the office. But I shrugged it off. He probably came home quickly to grab some files or use the bathroom. I was too focused on my own excitement to worry about small inconsistencies like that. As summer progressed, my affair with Marcus became the highlight of my existence. Every stolen moment felt like proof that I was still desirable, still worth pursuing. I found myself living for his texts, planning my days around opportunities to see him, and fantasizing about a life where I could have this kind of passion all the time. But Marcus started wanting more than just secret meetings. He began pressuring me to leave Saul, sending gifts to my workplace that were increasingly difficult to explain away, and talking about our future together as if it were a foregone conclusion. "You can't stay in a loveless marriage forever," he said during one of our hotel encounters. "Tyler would be happier with a mom who's truly fulfilled. Kids can sense when their parents aren't really in love." Part of me was flattered that he wanted more, but another part felt annoyed by the pressure. I hadn't planned on actually leaving my marriage. I just wanted to feel alive again. The affair was supposed to be about reclaiming my sense of self, not about blowing up my entire life. I started feeling paranoid about getting caught, but not because I felt guilty. I was worried about losing control of the situation before I was ready. I began checking Saul's location obsessively, monitoring his work schedule, and creating increasingly elaborate backup plans for every encounter with Marcus. One afternoon, I thought I spotted Saul's car near my office building, but when I called him, he answered from what sounded like his usual conference room. I convinced myself I'd been mistaken. Sol was far too busy with his clients to be driving around checking up on me. My relationship with Marcus became more complicated as he grew more possessive. He started stalking my social media accounts, getting jealous when I posted family photos, and demanding to know why I couldn't just be honest with Saul about wanting a divorce. I never said I wanted a divorce, I told him during one particularly tense conversation. I just want to feel appreciated. Can't you understand that? But Marcus had developed his own fantasy about our relationship, one that involved me choosing him over my family and starting fresh together. When I tried to explain that I wasn't ready for such drastic changes, he accused me of leading him on. You can't have it both ways forever, Lysandra, he said. Either you want to be with me, or you don't, but I'm not going to be your dirty little secret indefinitely. His ultimatum made me angry. Who was he to pressure me into making life-altering decisions? I was the one taking all the risks, managing all the logistics, keeping all the secrets. He got to enjoy the fun parts of our affair without dealing with any of the complicated realities of my actual life. I started pulling back from Marcus emotionally, which only made him more demanding. He began sending increasingly desperate messages, showing up at my workplace unannounced, and making comments about how he might need to take matters into his own hands if I couldn't make a decision. At home, I found myself snapping at Saul more frequently, picking fights about minor issues, and accusing him of being distant or suspicious. If he asked about my day, I interpreted it as interrogation. If he didn't ask, I saw it as proof that he didn't care about me. You're being really moody lately, Saul observed one evening, after I'd gotten angry about him leaving his socks on the bedroom floor. Is everything okay at work? Everything's fine, I replied curtly. Maybe I'm just tired of picking up after everyone in this house without getting any appreciation. Saul looked genuinely confused by my outburst. I appreciate everything you do, Lysandra. You know that. But his words felt hollow to me. If he really appreciated me, wouldn't he show it more often? Wouldn't he surprise me with flowers or plan romantic evenings, or tell me I looked beautiful without being prompted? I was so caught up in comparing him to Marcus that I couldn't see Saul clearly anymore. Every interaction was filtered through my resentment and guilt, twisted into evidence that supported my narrative about being undervalued and neglected. In August, I made a mistake that should have been a wake-up call. I accidentally sent a flirty meme meant for Marcus to Saul's phone instead. My heart stopped when I realized what I'd done, and I spent the next several hours in a panic, checking my phone constantly for his response. When Saul finally replied, it was just a confused emoji and a question mark. I quickly sent a follow-up message claiming I'd meant to send it to my friend Jessica as a joke about her dating life. Saul seemed to accept this explanation without question, which I took as further proof of his obliviousness. Looking back now, I realize how arrogant I was to assume that Saul's lack of confrontation meant he was clueless. I interpreted his calm demeanor as evidence that I was smarter than him, more sophisticated, better at managing complex situations. The truth was far more unsettling. By September, my double life had become exhausting. I was spending money we couldn't afford on hotels and new clothes, lying constantly to friends and family about my whereabouts, and feeling increasingly disconnected from my son. Tyler had started asking why Mommy was always on her phone, why she seemed distracted during their bedtime stories, why she forgot about school events that used to be important to her. "Mommy, are you sad?" he asked one evening as I tucked him into bed, my mind still replaying an argument I'd had with Marcus earlier that day. "No, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. "Mommy's just tired from work." But I was sad, in a way I hadn't expected. The affair that was supposed to make me feel alive and appreciated had become another source of stress and complication. Marcus was becoming increasingly demanding and unpredictable. Saul seemed more distant than ever. And I felt like I was losing pieces of myself in the process of trying to manage everyone else's expectations. Still, I couldn't bring myself to end it. The attention from Marcus, even when it came with pressure and drama, felt better than the quiet indifference I perceived at home. I told myself that I just needed to find a better balance, to be more careful, about managing both relationships without letting either one consume me completely. That's when I decided to take the biggest risk yet. On a rainy Friday in late September, I invited Marcus to our house for the entire afternoon. Saul had texted that morning saying he'd be stuck in back-to-back client meetings until at least 7 o'clock, and Tyler was at my mother-in-law's house for a sleepover with his cousins. It felt like the perfect opportunity to have Marcus in my space, in my bed, without any time pressure or fear of interruption. I spent the morning preparing, fresh sheets, candles, wine chilling in the refrigerator. I felt powerful and in control, orchestrating this elaborate seduction in the heart of my domestic life. Marcus arrived at 2 o'clock, and we spent hours making love with an intensity that felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. Afterward, as we lay in the bed I shared with Saul, I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't experienced in years. "This is how it should always be," Marcus whispered, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "You, me, no secrets, no hiding." For a moment I allowed myself to imagine what that might look like, a life where I could have this passion and intimacy without all the deception and guilt. But then reality crept back in, reminding me of mortgages and custody arrangements, and the complicated logistics of actually dismantling a life I'd spent 8 years building. After Marcus left around 6:30, I went through my usual cleanup routine with extra care. I stripped the bed completely, opened windows to air out the room, and took a long shower to wash away any lingering evidence of our encounter. I felt invincible, like I had successfully pulled off the perfect crime. When Saul came home at 8:15, I was in the kitchen making dinner, humming softly to myself and feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. He kissed my cheek absently and asked about my day, and I gave him the same vague response I always did. Work was fine. I'd run some errands, nothing exciting to report. It wasn't until I was loading the dishwasher later that evening that I noticed something odd. Saul's favorite coffee mug was in the sink again, and it had that same slightly warm feeling I'd noticed before. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said he'd probably used it that morning and forgotten to put it in the dishwasher. But something about his tone felt different, not suspicious exactly, but more deliberate than usual. For just a moment I felt a flicker of unease, wondering if I'd missed something important. Then Saul smiled at me and suggested we watch a movie together, and I pushed the worry aside. I was being paranoid, seeing threats where none existed. Saul trusted me completely, just as he always had. I was safe in my secret, protected by his love and his faith in our marriage. I had no idea that I was walking directly into the most perfectly orchestrated trap I'd ever encountered. October arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that usually made me feel hopeful and energized. Tyler was excited about Halloween preparations. Saul seemed more relaxed at work, and I felt like I had finally found a sustainable balance between my affair with Marcus and my responsibilities at home. That sense of control was about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. It started with small changes in Saul's behavior that I initially interpreted as positive signs. He stopped working late as frequently, seemed more present during family dinners, and even suggested we plan a special celebration for his upcoming birthday in November. "I want to do something different this year," he said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Maybe invite both sets of parents, your sister and her family, the Johnsons from next door. Make it a real celebration." I was surprised by his enthusiasm. Saul usually preferred quiet, low-key celebrations, and the idea of hosting a big family gathering seemed out of character for him. But I was pleased that he wanted to make an effort, and I threw myself into planning what I thought would be a lovely evening of reconnection with the people who mattered most to us. What I didn't realize was that Saul was planning something entirely different. The first hint that something was wrong came 3 days before the party. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus that made my blood run cold. "Your husband knows. He contacted me yesterday. We need to talk immediately." My hands shook as I read the message, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to call Marcus without my coworkers overhearing. When he answered, his voice was tight with panic. "Lysandra, he has everything. Marcus said without preamble. Photos, videos, text messages, hotel receipts. He's been watching us for months. He knows about every single time we've been together. The room started spinning around me. That's impossible, I whispered. Saul doesn't even know how to set up the security system on our house. He's not tech-savvy enough to spy on anyone. Well, he figured it out, Marcus replied grimly. He showed me footage from inside your house, Lysandra. From the day I was there in September, he has video of us in your bedroom. I felt like I was going to vomit. The careful planning, the meticulous cleanup, the confidence that I was too smart to get caught, it had all been an illusion. Saul had been watching me destroy our marriage from the very beginning, collecting evidence with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this story would end. What did he say to you? I managed to ask. He was very calm, Marcus said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. He thanked me for my time and told me that my services would no longer be needed. He said if I contacted you again or came anywhere near your family, he would make sure everyone in town knew exactly what kind of man I am. But we can figure this out, I said desperately. We can explain that we fell in love, that these things happen, that marriage is complicated. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Lysandra, I can't do this anymore. This was supposed to be fun, not a complete disaster. I'm not ready to have my life destroyed over an affair with a married woman. So you're just abandoning me? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay quiet. When things get difficult, you're going to run away and leave me to deal with this alone. I'm sorry, he said, but he didn't sound sorry. He sounded relieved. I think it's better for everyone if we just end this now, before it gets any worse. He hung up before I could respond, and when I tried to call him back, the number went straight to voicemail. Within an hour, I discovered that he had blocked me on every social media platform and deleted all traces of our relationship from his online presence. I drove home that evening in a state of complete panic, my mind racing through possible explanations and excuses. Maybe I could convince Saul that Marcus had been stalking me, that I was the victim of an obsessed co-worker. Maybe I could claim that the evidence had been manipulated somehow, that technology had been used to make innocent interactions look suspicious. But when I walked into our house, Saul was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of him, looking more calm and composed than I had seen him in months. "Hello, Lysandra," he said quietly. "I think we need to have a conversation." The folder contained everything Marcus had warned me about and more. Security camera footage from multiple angles showing Marcus entering and leaving our house, screenshots of hundreds of text messages between us, credit card statements highlighting hotel charges and restaurant bills, even photos of us together that had been taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Since the beginning of May," Saul replied. "You left your phone unlocked on the counter one morning, and I saw a message from Marcus about how much he enjoyed your coffee date the day before. I knew you hadn't mentioned having coffee with anyone, so I started paying attention." 4 months. He had known for 4 months and said nothing, watching me lie to his face every single day while he quietly gathered evidence of my betrayal. "The security cameras were installed in June," he continued. "A professional system with cloud storage and remote access. I could watch everything from my office computer. I thought about all those times I had felt so clever, so careful, so certain that I was outsmarting him. Meanwhile, he had been documenting every detail of my affair with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. "Saul, I can explain," I began, but he held up his hand to stop me. "There's nothing to explain," he said. "I have all the information I need. The question now is what happens next." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect that I already knew. "Tomorrow night, at my birthday dinner, I'm going to show our families and friends exactly who you really are," he said, "and then I'm going to ask you to leave our house and not come back." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of desperate planning and growing dread. I considered running away, confessing everything before the party, or even trying to turn the tables by accusing Saul of violating my privacy. But every scenario I imagined ended with the same result: complete social and personal destruction. The evening of Saul's birthday party, I dressed carefully in a blue dress that had always been his favorite, hoping against hope that I could somehow salvage this situation through sheer force of will. Our house filled with family members and friends, everyone laughing and chatting as if this were a normal celebration. My parents were there, along with Saul's mother and stepfather. My sister Jennifer had driven down from Cleveland with her husband and 2 kids. The Johnsons from next door brought her homemade cake. Even Tyler's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had stopped by to drop off a card from his class. After dinner, as everyone gathered in the living room for dessert, Saul stood up and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "Before we have cake, I want to share something important with the people who matter most to me." He picked up a remote control and turned on our large-screen television. Some of you may be wondering why I've seemed a little distant lately. The truth is, I've been dealing with a difficult situation, and I wanted to handle it properly before involving anyone else. The screen flickered to life, showing security camera footage of our front door. The timestamp showed a date in September, and I watched in horror as the video showed Marcus arriving at our house, looking around nervously before I opened the door and pulled him inside. "This is my wife Lysandra," Saul continued in the same calm tone, welcoming her boyfriend into our home while I was supposedly at work and our son was at his grandmother's house. The room fell completely silent except for the sound of my mother's sharp intake of breath. On the screen, the footage switched to our bedroom, showing Marcus and me in an intimate embrace that left no doubt about the nature of our relationship. "I've been documenting this affair for several months," Saul said, clicking to the next slide, which showed a timeline of hotel visits, restaurant meals, and text message exchanges. "I wanted to make sure I had complete information before making any decisions about our marriage and our family's future." I looked around the room at the faces of everyone I loved, seeing shock, disappointment, and disgust reflected in their expressions. My father stood up abruptly and walked out the front door without saying a word. My mother was crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. Jennifer was staring at me like she had never seen me before. Tyler, thank God, had been sent to play in his room before the presentation began, sparing him from witnessing this moment of complete humiliation. "I've already filed for divorce," Saul continued. "I've also spoken with a lawyer about custody arrangements, and given the evidence of Lysandra's behavior, I'm confident that Tyler will be staying with me. I've changed the locks on our house, closed our joint bank accounts, and informed both of our employers about the situation." "Saul, please," I finally managed to say, but my voice came out as a broken whisper that no one seemed to hear. "I want everyone to understand that this wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness," he said, advancing to the next slide, which showed months of text messages between Marcus and me. "This was a deliberate, sustained deception that involved lying to all of you, stealing money from our family, and bringing a stranger into our home where our child sleeps." He turned off the television and looked directly at me for the first time since the presentation began. "Lysandra, I need you to leave now. Your personal belongings will be packed and available for pickup tomorrow. Any communication from this point forward should go through our lawyers." The room remained silent as I stood up on unsteady legs, looking around at the faces of people who had loved and trusted me just minutes earlier. No one met my eyes. No one spoke in my defense. No one asked me to explain or offered me comfort. I walked out of my own house and into the cold October night, leaving behind everything I had once considered mine. As I sat in my car in the driveway, I could see through the living room window as Saul cut his birthday cake, surrounded by family members who were undoubtedly discussing what they had just witnessed. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister. "Don't contact me until you figure out how to apologize for what you've done to that man and that little boy." Then another from my mother. "I'm ashamed to call you my daughter right now." And, finally, one from Saul. "Tyler asked why Mommy left during Daddy's party. I told him you had to go help a friend with an emergency. Please don't make me tell him the truth." I started my car and drove away from the life I had destroyed, finally understanding that Saul's revenge wasn't just about exposing my affair. It was about showing everyone exactly who I had become, a woman who was willing to sacrifice her family's happiness for a few moments of selfish pleasure. The most devastating part wasn't the public humiliation or the financial consequences, or even the loss of my marriage. It was the realization that Saul had loved me enough to fight for our relationship in the most thorough way possible, by giving me every opportunity to choose our family over my affair, and documenting my failure to do so with heartbreaking precision. I had thought I was the smart one, the one in control, the one who deserved better. But Saul had proven that real intelligence isn't about managing deception. It's about protecting the people you love from those who would harm them, even if the person causing the harm is supposed to love them most of all. The end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching. Ching, 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 ching.